Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome to our LegalVision webinar today, Ask a Cap-Raising Lawyer, Seed, Series A, and beyond. My name is Mike Mullins. I'm one of our senior legal consultants here at LegalVision, and today we are very lucky to be joined by our Managing Director, Head of NZ Legal, Georgina Toomey, whose bread and butter is startup capital raising. So it's going to be a fantastic webinar today. Now, just a bit of initial housekeeping. You will receive a recording of the slides in the email, so don't feel like you've got to scramble and write heaps of notes. We will be sending you that recording out after this. Feel free to submit your questions anytime in the Q&A box below, and we'll get to them. We are limited in time, but we'll try and get to as many as possible, if not all of them, and upvote the questions you're most interested in hearing about so we can really prioritize the topics. And please, just a little one from us, if you wouldn't mind completing the feedback survey after the webinar. It's really important and it helps us moving forward. Now, you are eligible for a complimentary consultation by viewing this webinar today. This is where LegalVision, we can get into the nitty-gritty and help you discuss where we can help the business moving forward. To claim, it's really easy. Just leave your contact details in the survey or contact us via the website after the webinar. Now, as some of you will be aware, we do work through an innovative membership model here at LegalVision. It was originally designed for startups, with startups in mind, and very different to that usual hourly rates traditional legal model. With the membership, the startup membership, you are entitled to unlimited business as usual legal advice consultations, unlimited documentation, other key things for your startup legal foundation like trademarks, employment and HR. We've got a technology platform that you can access called Prism that leads to fast turnarounds, and we do on-demand education as well. So feel free to explore this in more detail with myself by claiming your complimentary legal health check after the webinar. And I look forward to discussing how we can help your business in more detail. To claim that, just as I mentioned, feel free to complete the survey in your own time. And it is now time for our live Q&A with Georgina Toomey. Feel free to scan the QR and download our startup manual at any time during the webinar, but I'll now gladly hand over to the expert, Georgina Toomey. Georgie.
Thanks, Mike. Look, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Look, it's a slightly different format to what we sometimes you have seen we've done in the past. The whole purpose of this is to answer your questions directly. So please make the most of the opportunity. We've already had a number of submitted questions prior to the webinar, so thanks to those who have already sent through questions. And yeah, as they crop up and become front of mind, please do send them through and we'll keep an eye on those as we go. So, look, the first question that I've had come through is, and it's a good place to start, is in a New Zealand context, how much investor motivation is there to invest into an idea compared with other countries? So, look, what we're talking about here really is really early stage investment. So you're at the stage where there is an idea, you've got a concept, you're likely pre-MVP, and you're really relying on investors who are happy to take a bit of a risk to support you without any real evidence of success yet, or likely success. So the types of investors we're looking at here are typically angel investors. Or, if you're slightly further along in the journey, it might be that you are starting to look at institutional VCs as well. In short, to the question, in New Zealand, the startup ecosystem is incredibly supportive, and you'll find a lot of people that are willing to give time and basically connect you. And as we all know, New Zealand's a very small country, so I'd really encourage you to benefit from all of those connections that we do have within that very small ecosystem. However, it is, it's worth being realistic here. We are a small country, and so by virtue of that, typically our angel networks and our VC ecosystem, by nature of size only, is slightly less mature and relatively, small compared to international standards. But it's really just a question of scale. But I would say that those that are in the system, they do punch above their weight in terms of support. Now, it's also worth noting on this point as well is that, outside of actually seeking investment. When you are early stage, that can obviously be quite difficult at times. So when you are really early stage, I would also encourage you to look beyond just pure investment and look to things like government R&D incentives. Are there any sector specific grants that you might be able to look to? So say in the agriculture sector, and also look to some of the accelerator programs that are around. Now, you're not going to raise huge amounts of capital from these things, but they will serve as really great launching pads for future rounds. And it's particularly important when we're talking about this stage of investing in an idea only. Now that leads me on. We've had a separate question which is related here, and it's asking, what do investors see or want to see when they're looking to invest at that pre-MVP stage? Now, when we are looking to angels, I'll speak to angels mainly in this space, what they're really looking for here is they're looking for a really strong founding team with the right expertise. They're effectively at this stage, they're investing in the people, not the business. So that's really critical. Then they're starting to look, well, actually, has there been some market research? Has there been sort of a customer discovery process which really proves that there is a demand for what you're trying to achieve? And are you sort of working on a prototype or a proof of concept, even if you haven't got to the full MVP stage yet? And then the final thing that they'd be looking at that stage is there a really clear path to revenue and scalability for your business? Now, that's really important in the New Zealand context. Going back to my earlier point about the limitation of scale and size of our country, often what you'll see your investors are doing is they're looking to businesses with clear export potentials or scalability globally. So, how easy is it going to be to launch into Australia, to UK, and beyond? Then looking at the next question that I've got here, it's how does one avoid giving away too much of your company in exchange for investment? Now, this is it's an age-old question, and we're often asked it with our clients who are looking to do their first funding round. Unfortunately, there's no kind of firm answer in terms of how you do this. But what I would encourage you to think about it, or how you should think about it, is it's really a balancing act. It's a balancing act between holding on to as much equity for as long as possible. Now, the reason you're wanting to do this is obviously, you're wanting to create value for yourself as founder in the future, but also during those early stages, you're wanting to be as maneuverable and fast-paced as you can possibly be. You want to be able to make decisions in isolation and really respond quickly to the environment, be flexible, be changeable, and that can sometimes be difficult if you've got external investors who you are answering to. The flip side of this is, obviously a lot of startups are going to get to the point where they can no longer bootstrap, and they are going to have to look for external investment. Now, while you don't want to fall into this trap of giving away too much equity early on, also I try to encourage our clients, don't be afraid of some dilution. You are, as long as you're going out to investors with a clear picture of how you're going to use those funds, a clear proof of concept, and likely successful scalability, then ultimately what you're going to just end up is with a slightly smaller piece of a larger pie. So as long as that investment's going to work from you and increase the value of your stake, then I would encourage you not to be afraid of it. Now, what you also want to be considering, because often when we're talking about this in terms of don't give away too much equity too early on, we do see companies making that mistake and they give away too much early on. Now, that has obviously issues from protecting the value of ownership that you have in your company as founder. The other piece that you sort of potentially have issues with there is that in the future, it might limit you in terms of the success of your later rounds. Investors are often looking to ensure that the founders, who again, they're the key people that are involved, they have enough skin in the game to properly incentivize the continued growth and success of that business. So it's a really important thing to be cognizant of, and map out your cap table beyond your current round to your Series A, Series B, and sort of sense check effectively the valuation that you're attaching to your company. Now, the other thing that to be thinking about as well as during these early stage investments, which we're talking about, is that you want to make sure that your investors are not only bringing cash. So at that stage, they really should be providing you other really significant benefits. So bringing a skill set to the table that's specific to what you need for the current stage of the business, and having them potentially sitting on the board and contributing in a meaningful way. So look beyond just the actual cash investment to what else they can contribute. I'm sort of absorbing my next comment into the next question that we've got, which talks about convertible instruments. So one of the biggest difficulties that we have, and one of the reasons we see early stage startups the founders giving away too much equity at that early stage in the first funding round or two, is often because of the issues around valuation. So anytime you're doing an equity round, you are going to have to attach your valuation to your company, and that will determine the dilution that you will experience. Very, very difficult to attach a sensible valuation at the early stage. So what I would suggest you do is, if you are concerned about, how much equity is appropriate at this stage, and if it is the first funding round that you're doing, then a convertible instrument may well be the right answer for you. A convertible instrument, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, is typically what you'll hear referred to as a convertible note or a safe. Two different instruments, but they operate relatively similarly. And the idea here is that you can accept funds into the company early with a relatively simple investment document, but you're effectively holding that investor at arm's length for a period. So they're going to sit there with the right to convert their cash investment into equity in the future. The main benefit there is that you are not having to attach a valuation. The only point that investment will effectively convert into shares and a valuation will be attached to it is when it converts later down the track, when you do a priced equity round. So as a founder, you can wait for a bit longer until you're a bit further down your proof of concept stage. You might have started to onboard some paying customers. And at that point in time, you can attach what you hope to be a much more close to a market valuation. And you can have confidence that whatever dilution you're experiencing is effectively fair dilution. So the convertible instruments are a really effective tool for early stage rounds before you get to the stage where you can have hopefully a competitive capital raising process where you have a number of investors vying for lead, which is obviously the ultimate that we're all trying to achieve. The next question I have had is, if we're developing a SaaS product, and there's an example which I expect is very specific to this person, so I'll just leave it at a SaaS product. If we're developing a SaaS product, at what point should we consider approaching investors, and what key milestones would make us attractive for seed or Series A funding? So with this question, it's a SaaS product. What your investors are probably looking at around the seed stage is they're looking at, from a product development perspective, they are looking at your MVP. Do you have a basic user interface? Have you validated that? Have you sort of started to get some initial customer feedback? Are you starting to incorporate that as well? They're looking at some market validation. So have you got potentially some pilot customers using the product? Are you addressing what you've defined as your target market? And are you starting to see some early traction? At the seed stage round, that's really what they're looking at. They're not looking at too much beyond that. But as soon as you're getting to your Series A, you're kind of looking at a bit more of an increase of each of those metrics. So has there been an increase in your monthly recurring revenue? Is there consistent growth month on month that they can see? Have you increased your paying customers? Some of those really key metrics that they are looking at for that later stage round. And as I said sort of earlier as well, the thing to think about here as well as in New Zealand specifically, your investors are going to be looking at your ability to easily scale beyond the New Zealand market as well. The next question I have is, what is the best business structure to have? And the particular example that we've been given here is we have 3 entities at present set up as a franchise system, and as a SaaS setup going to be different. Now, I won't speak to the franchising scenario in too much detail. Typically, franchisors and the setup of their corporate structure it demands a more unique corporate structure than you would in a more classic SaaS business. You're often looking to effectively have your IP and your franchise system set up in a separate company to any owner-operated stores or businesses, which is then separate to the company that's engaging with each of your franchisees. So that corporate structure looks quite different. With a SaaS company or generally, very, very broadly speaking, the corporate structure that you'd look for in any other business, typically, inevitably we are looking at a company. It's got all the benefits of limited liability protection. Your customers, your investors are going to be familiar with the structure. It's a really simple but elegant structure to basically ensure that you've got the right equity allocations as between your founders and your investors, and it doesn't necessarily have to be proportionate. So we are looking at the company structure most of the time. There's obviously exceptions to that, but talking to the majority of our audience, and then the question really becomes, do I need a dual company structure? And a dual company structure is obviously a slightly more complex solution here, and that's where you effectively are setting up a holding company which sits above your operating company. And in your holding company, you have all your key assets that you want to protect away from the trading liabilities of your operating company. Now, it sounds like a wonderful solution, but it's definitely not a case of an absolute every SaaS business should have a dual company structure set up. It's very much situational dependent. Often what I'm asking our clients in this situation where they raise this as an option is, what actually are the key assets of this business? If it is IP and you are heavily reliant on the IP and that's where all of the value sits in your business, and the operations of the business, the industry that you're operating in, the type of business that you're operating is a particularly high risk, then that tends to suggest to me that yes, a dual company structure is justified. If IP is not critical to your business and you don't really have many other kind of key assets that need to be protected and you're operating in a low risk industry with a low risk product, then it's probably just unnecessarily complicating things. Now, the other comment to make there as well is don't feel as if you need to make these decisions right at the outset. You can set up as a single company and then later down the track restructure it into a dual company structure, if and when things have changed and suddenly that more complicated structure is justified. The other scenario that we see, which you may want to rely on, is sometimes when companies get to the stage that they've done, say, a friends and family round, they've had some angel investors come on board. The first time that they go out to institutional VCs, sometimes those VCs, having completed their due diligence of the company and the business, will say, actually, as a condition of our investment, we want you to set up a dual company structure. And so what we would do then, or whatever lawyer you're working with, is we would complete that dual company structure as part of that preparation for that investment round. So you're almost leaving it to your investors to identify whether, I guess, it's justified, the more complex corporate structure. And relying on their view of that having done DD is helpful because from their perspective, they are looking to protect the value of their investment. So, your interests as founder are really aligned in that regard. We have a question here which asks, what investment types would you recommend for an early stage startup? So a startup that hasn't raised any investment yet. So this is really looking at, well, what do we mean by a seed round, Series A? What are our options here? So very, very early doors, as a founder, most likely you are going to be bootstrapping. And so bootstrapping is effectively you are funding it yourself. You're probably not taking a salary, and you're tipping in any capital that's required to effectively get off the ground. At that stage, I would be recommending that you are looking outside that to these accelerator programs, considering any grants that might be available, finding that kind of broader community, even if it's not really a significant cash injection. Then typically what founders will look to is doing a friends and family round. Now, friends and family round is obviously they are people that are close to you. They want to see you succeed, and they're not necessarily looking for a successful investment. They are not requiring anything from it other than to say we support you, and we're going to tip some money in, and if something comes of it, fantastic. Beyond that, you're starting to look at your angel investors, so people in the community who habitually invest, people who might have relevant industry expertise. They're really kind of in your camp, there to support you, have a bit of cash, and ideally some really significant expertise that you can lean on as well. That would be your next stage. And then we're looking to go into your Series A and beyond. So that's when you're starting to reach out to VCs and the like, and you're starting to get into a much more, I guess, sophisticated stage of your business, working with more sophisticated investors who will put in more money, but will also naturally demand some more of you as well in return for that. The next question we have is asking what the role is of an angel investor, and what returns angel investors are. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but really angel investors are known for investing early doors. There is at that stage obviously the potential for higher returns in return for their early commitment. But often the role there, the importance from a founder perspective is, what are they contributing in addition to money or cash? So normally what you're looking for in the role of an angel investor is some sort of mentorship and guidance. So are they sharing some industry experience? Do they have a certain business acumen that you might be missing? What are their networks? So are they going to introduce you to potential customers, partners, future investors? Can they help you with strategic oversight over your business? And the other piece as well, which I think is sort of lesser sort of considered here, but also equally as important, is the credibility that they can potentially give you as a business. So their investment basically lends validation to other investors and other stakeholders. If it's someone that's well known in the industry, people can be lazy and they'll think, oh, well, if Mike Mellons is investing in that business, well, he's obvious, he knows what he's doing, so I'm going to put some money into as well, just off the back of knowing that they're also involved. So that can be hugely advantageous. In terms of what they want out of it, so it depends angel by angel, but some in terms of involvement, probably a good place to start. Some will want to be completely hands off, and then some will want a voice at the table. They might want to sit on your board and be heavily involved. So it really comes down to your particular relationship with that angel. Now, some of them, or all of them, ultimately are seeking high returns. And that's why people get into investment. But angels will also understand that, again, to my point earlier, it's high risk when you are investing at this early stage. So they understand that there is also a high risk of failure. So a lot of their investments will fail. And I'm talking about, 80% might fail. So all they're really looking for is one or two big wins to compensate for those losses. And the other comment, I guess, there is that they're typically a little bit more patient than your institutional VCs. So they're not going to be pushing you for an exit within a predefined period. They understand that it's early stage. There's a few hoops to jump through before then, so they can be an incredibly supportive investor to have on your cap table. We've had quite a few coming through as we go, which is great. I've had a question here around sort of if I'm joining a startup as a co-founder, which is bootstrapping, how do I determine valuation? Now, look, again, that sort of goes to my early point. it's very difficult to attach a sensible valuation at that time. Now, you can go out and get an independent valuation, but what we often find is that can be incredibly costly exercise, and even an independent valuer will sort of have some issues in terms of valuation at that point in time. So that's really what I would, if you're in a sort of a competitive scenario, I'm fortunate to be in a competitive scenario, and you've got some investors who have invested in similar businesses, and there's almost a competitive process going on, then you can get some comfort from the valuations that are being thrown around as part of that. But alternatively, I would really encourage you to look at maybe a convertible instrument in the first instance before you look to actually attach a valuation. As a side note, but it is somewhat related, the IRD, I'm thinking about this from a context of ESOPs. So ESOPs, which, the tax position on ESOPs is about to change next year anyway, but that's well beyond the scope of this webinar. But the IRD has previously issued guidance around how startups can value their company. And there's 3 or 4 different valuation methodologies for the purposes of ESOPs that can be applied, that the IRD will recognise. So, if you're wanting some sort of, I guess, market parameters to work within, that can also be a helpful tool, is finding the IRD guidance and having a look at that as well, because it's very much tailored to startups. The next question we have here is it appropriate to pay for equity to join a startup as a co-founder, which is bootstrapping? Pay for equity to join a startup. So look, this is very much situational dependent. It's a really good question, and a lot of businesses will grapple with this at some point. At the early stage, if we are talking about a co-founder relationship, often what you are looking at here is likely, let's assume it's 2 founders, likely neither of you are getting paid for the work that you're putting into the business. And often what you'll look to do is agree an appropriate equity allocation, which reflects each of your contributions on the basis that it's pretty much deemed to be sweat equity. It can get a little bit difficult if maybe you've got a co-founder joining a bit later on. Then it's a matter of, well, how do we actually value that equity that co-founder is getting? Can we attach that all to sweat or not? Or should they really be buying in to basically true up, I guess, the other founder and the capital that they've put into the business when you haven't been involved? So there's no real sort of firm answer for that without knowing a bit more about the background there. But there's lots of flexibility in terms of how you can manage these arrangements. All I would say is, have a think about, if you're not requiring, if nobody's paying anything for the equity, and it is considered a true co-founder relationship, then you are probably going to want to think about vesting provisions that you agree between yourselves. And the idea there is that you're both effectively locking yourselves in as founders for a pre-agreed period of time before you can take any value out of the company. And that's acknowledging that you're both bringing a particular skill set to the table, and you both need to be involved for a certain period of time to actually give the company the best opportunity to succeed and to get some value out of it. So there's all sorts of different levers that you can pull in that regard to effectively protect both of your interests. Got an interesting question here. When you're onboarding a tech co-founder for your product, what's the right equity split? My main answer there would be, it doesn't necessarily, if it's 2 co-founders, it's not necessarily 50-50. I think everyone is inclined to default to 50-50, and quite often that can be quite appropriate. But then you can have scenarios where actually both of you are very much on the page that actually your contributions are not 50-50, nor do you intend them to be 50-50 going forwards. So look, it's something that you need to have a very open and honest discussion with your co-founder right at the outset, and work out what that appropriate allocation is. Now, if you're not absolutely sure on it, then you might want to almost backfill it with playing around with your vesting arrangements as well. So it might be that the later onboarded co-founder, there might be an element of, well, they actually have to earn some of their equity allocation, whereas the other one didn't, as you try and right size each of your roles going forwards. So again, situational dependent, but lots of levers to pull in terms of making sure that the split as between you is appropriate. The other thing to think about always, given the context and the topic of this discussion, is try and think about things right from the early stage with the lens of what happens when I go through my Series A, Series B, when I'm going out to those external investors and they're starting to do their due diligence. What are the questions that they're going to ask? What are they going to want to see? Will they consider that this is an appropriate split as between the co-founders? So looking at it with that lens gives it an element of impartiality as well, which can be helpful, given these are quite sensitive topics to be discussing between you as well. We've got a question here. What's a good percentage of equity on an angel investor round? Valuation caps too, pre or post, and for pre-MVP. So I'm going to have to sort of create the question myself and sort of make some assumptions here. In terms of a good percentage of equity on an angel investor round, look, there's no right or wrong answer there, but I'd be saying you're looking, usually angel investors are, they're probably going to put in maybe between 200,000 and 500,000, that round, the angel investor round. And in terms of percentage equity, you're probably looking at around sort of 10 to 15% for that round as well. Again, very, very rudimentary numbers, but just to hopefully give you a bit of a feel for the sorts of parameters that you're looking at that stage. With valuation caps, now that is that's going to come into play when we're talking about convertible instruments. So, and it's a good question because, obviously I have talked about the major benefit of a convertible instrument being that obviously you're pushing the question of valuation down the road to when your Series A might happen, or whenever you do your priced equity round. That can sometimes get a bit scuppered by your investors under that convertible round applying what we call a valuation cap. So what they're saying is, yes, I'm happy for my $50,000 to be converted later down the track and the valuation to be set at that point in time, but actually I want to cap that. So it will be capped potentially, we'll put a $10 million valuation cap on it. And so the benefit from an investor perspective there is it creates some parameters where they can determine, I guess, worst case scenario effectively, or best case scenario, and calculate off that. So it does require the company to then obviously negotiate what a sensible valuation cap is. So it's not quite as onerous actually setting a valuation at that point in time, but you still have to turn your mind to it to a certain extent. Pre and post valuation caps. So what we're talking about there really is how is the conversion calculated. I think probably the detail goes beyond the scope of this webinar, but ultimately how that conversion is calculated really comes down to a negotiation with your investors. So again, there's no right or wrong answer there. It's ultimately going to come down to what you negotiate. Obviously, one's going to be more founder friendly and one's going to be more investor friendly. All I can say is be very, very clear on that. Make sure that your documents reflect it. We have had a number of scenarios where the terms of the convertible instruments are unclear, and effectively when you're going through your priced equity round, companies are having to go back to their convertible note investors or their convertible instrument investors and clarify terms, which is incredibly complicated at that stage. The other piece as well, which is a broader comment for capital raising for founders, full stop, is to the extent you can try and identify a lead investor. So any of these negotiation points, you do not want to be negotiating with multiple investors, and you don't want to be agreeing different terms with multiple investors in the same round. identify who your lead is going to be. It needs to be an investor who's prepared to engage with you direct and negotiate the terms. And then the response to your other investors are you follow on the same terms. As you get to your Series B, C, D, that will be incredibly helpful to have everybody on the same terms as you are going through your cap table verifications and converting convertible instruments and the like. And from a founder perspective as well, it's, capital raising is not a short process. It can be very, very efficient if you have good, well-versed investors, but it does still suck up a lot of time and energy. And so it's not something that you want to be doing every couple of months. And so to the extent that you can make that process as easy as possible, i.e. working just with one lead, I really and strongly encourage you to do that, and sort of make your life as easy as possible so that you can move on to actually deploy the capital that you have raised. So look, I feel like I've just been speaking. And so Mike, I think given the time, I think we've probably run out of time. And I guess before I hand over to you, Mike, to the extent that I haven't answered a question, it's probably because it's very, very specific. Look, very, very happy to answer those questions outside of the context of this webinar, which obviously we're trying to appeal to the broadest audience that we can. So please do just reach out and we can have a separate consultation to talk to those more specific questions directly. So over to you, Mike.
Brilliant. Thank you, Georgie. That was amazingly and extremely insightful, and I think really goes to show Georgie's expertise in the space and how passionate we are about helping startup founders in New Zealand scale their amazing innovations and businesses. On that note, please feel free, I know I mentioned it earlier, to download our startup manual. It is a really good read and really helps with your legal planning in relation to timelines and kind of upcoming things to prioritize. So feel free to scan the QR and download that. And please, you're all welcome to join us for our next webinar, Building a Strong Startup. Ask a lawyer and founder through your tough questions. So this is going to be really interactive. We're going to have a cool founder on the webinar who's been in the trenches to really give us that insight from the front lines. So that's on Tuesday, the 14th of October at 12 p.m. So please feel free to register using legalvision.co.nz/events. Go in there. It's going to be a really good one. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to explore this in a lot more detail, we would love to talk to you. So feel free to claim that complimentary consultation. You're more than eligible, and to do so, just fill out your contact details in the survey. It'll appear after the webinar, or just reach out to us anytime via the website. We'd love to hear more about what you're building and where we could add value. So thanks again, Georgie, and thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Mike.